What is up, high performers? I am your high performance mentor and registered dietitian and podcast host, Desi Abeda. Welcome to another Mentorship Monday, where we take little bite sized areas of building habit formation, helping you to understand your past conditioning, and we try to get it all in a little 10 to 15-minute ball so that it's digestible, right? A lot of feedback that I've been getting with these is that you really, really like them. A lot of our listeners really like them, is because it's small, it's short, it's 10 to 15 minutes, and then you get to go about your day. But here's the real kicker behind these things. So if you do me this favor, if you are a day one listener to our Mentorship Mondays, make sure that as you're sharing this podcast, you're really trying to create a lot of momentum and positivity around starting at the beginning. So if this is your first Mentorship Monday, make sure you go back into episodes 36 and 38 where we first started, because each and every episode is going to be habit stacking in the same way that we're trying to do that here. So this last week, we really dove into trying to get you out of this all or nothing space. Please, please, you guys and gals, all you high performers, I can't tell you more often than not, when I work with these really great high performers in our one-to-one or group coaching programs, or even just talking with a lot of you all, a lot of you are getting stuck with this all or nothing thinking, right? And it's one of the probably most infamous cognitive distortions that happens with a lot of us, where we set ourselves an expectation that is perfection usually, and then we get mad at ourselves for being human. And this causes us to get stuck and not to have any sort of forward momentum, because at the end of the day, we're looking towards progression, we're looking towards creating clarity, and we're looking towards downloading new messages into your mind, right? I saw this the other day. I think Jim Quick said it from the Quick Brain podcast. He had talked about how our brain is this really phenomenal computer, and the messages that we give it are, or that we download into this computer, play a huge role, and that's our subconscious, right? The power of the subconscious is huge. So if you're constantly downloading messages that you're not worth it, you're not enough, you're unloved, you're unseen, you're unheard, you can't do this, 100% you're going to be stuck, right? You're not going to have the confidence or even just the self-love to be able to chase something that you didn't think was attainable, because your computer has been downloaded all these messages. So in the other way of this, we want to kind of opposite reaction here. We want to start downloading messages that are actually serving you. And so this podcast is really helping you to dive into the habit so that you can start to explore your past conditioning, and really in a lot of ways start to ask your questions about your own journey with self-love. And that's what this is about. All right. So today's topic, and this started my habit forming career, if you will. I read this book probably 10 years ago, and it floored me, because the Power Habit from James Duhigg is such it's such a monumental podcast that I thought was really great, and it changed a lot of how I interact with how I receive information, how I navigate my habits, what I know about them. And I said James. I got James Clear on the mind right now. Obviously, Charles Duhigg. Sorry, and I'll make sure that I put all of the notes in the show notes, and the links, and how to get to this book, and whatnot. So going back to the story, my bad. All right, I'm imperfect. I'm just trying to be like y'all, right? So going back to Charles Duhigg's book, like I started reading this, like I said, about 10 years ago, and what it taught me about habits, it taught me how human we are. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. And obviously, being trained as a registered dietitian and starting off with eating disorders, one of the big things that a lot of therapists and a lot of what we do just in eating disorder treatment is we help people to understand their past conditioning, we help them to understand their behaviors, and then we move them forward towards behaviors that are actually serving them, while recognizing where their reward systems are coming from. Okay. And so, big topic today is the habit loop and how habits work. A lot of this work was done from Charles Duhigg from The Power of Habit. And we'll make sure that we put any of this stuff in the show notes. If you want to do an audio book, or if you want to sit down and read this book, it was life changing for me, because in so many ways, it made so much sense when we're trying to help people to examine their relationship with habits, and what that has to do with their triggers, and what it has to do with their reward systems. Okay. So, what we know about this, so MIT researchers discovered a simple neurological loop at the core of every single habit. All right. And at that loop, what they found was there was three consistent parts. There was going to be a trigger, there was going to be a behavior, and there was going to be some type of reward system. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pull this up in our stream. So if you have an opportunity, make sure that you head over to our IGTV so that you can watch this, or even just our YouTube channel. We'll make sure that we put those links in the show notes just so that you can kind of get a visual of what we have here. So I'm going to do my best to describe this verbally, obviously, for all my listeners, all my pod listeners out there, just so that you can understand. So how every habit works is there's going to be some sort of trigger. All right. And one way that you can sort of get some clarity around this is a trigger is you're gonna think noun. It's gonna be a person, place, or a thing, right? It's gonna be something that someone says. It's gonna be a certain place, maybe a certain time of day that kind of triggers you to do something. I think the classic example here is like, for most of us who are in the office, who are actually going to work, a lot of us are working from home. Some of us are going back in the office right now, or for the small select few have been in this office the whole time. Shout out to our essential workers. I got to put that in there. But for those of us who had some sort of lunch hour, 12 o'clock would usually come around. You look at your watch and you're like, you know what? That trigger just happens. I think I can eat. And then you go into the behavior. So a good example of that with your triggers is going to be just that. All right. So the next phase that we have here is going to go from our trigger to the behavior. So the behavior is any action that's taken as a result of the trigger. So going back to the example that I just talked about, so 12 o'clock, looking at your watch and seeing that it was 12 o'clock, it was lunchtime, was the trigger. The behavior is actually getting up and going in to the cafeteria or getting your lunch, right? The lunch room, whatever that is. Okay. Now, this next phase of what we go through, so we go from our trigger to our behavior. The next thing that we go to is our reward system. So just with that example, so we see our watch, we see that it's 12. The behavior is going to the lunchroom, and the reward system is feelings of satisfaction or feelings of excitement. So really, what we look at in this reward system, it's that dopamine hit, right? It's that feel good. The same thing happens if you kind of think about it too with like your 5 o'clock. There's an ongoing joke amongst people that it's like anytime you get a drink and it's before 5, it's like, well, it's happy hour somewhere. Well, right there, it's a little bit of it is very much a dopamine hit. And that's what happens just from the standpoint of alcohol. Like your brain is craving that dopamine hit. So as we go back to this trigger, what we're trying to understand a little bit more fully is where the triggers come from. And in a lot of ways, it could be person, place, or thing. But if we go a little bit deeper, and this is where I think the habits really play a role here, when we go a little bit deeper, the triggers and the reward systems, for in most cases, they don't really change, right? I think the classic example that I used to really help people to understand from the standpoint of people who had big issues with binge eating. It was like, okay, so what are our triggers? So it could be something that you thought about. It could be a trigger from past trauma, something that someone said. Um, looking at your body and getting triggered because of that, right? And so what we kind of did with these people, helping them to engage in better recovery behaviors, we help them to understand that the triggers likely are never going to move. They're likely going to stay the same, in the same way that in this case, if we're looking at the classic binge eater, it's like, okay, there's going to be this trigger. The behavior is actually overeating, or it's engaging in a binge eating episode. And then a reward system is usually going to be some type of safety. It's going to be control. I mean, how many of us as listeners out there, how many of you as listeners out there have gotten to a point where you're doing a certain behavior and you know that it's not serving you, right? It could be, one of our really, really great high performers about a month ago was like, man, like I used to like really enjoy hanging out with friends, having some drinks, but it started catching up on me on my Mondays, and then it went into Tuesday, and I just wasn't myself, and I was just losing too much time in this high performance life that I want. And so a while ago, this person decided, like, you know what, I'm going to test out just not drinking. Like it's impacting my habits, it's impacting the outcome. Let me just test this out. And this person's about a month, like a month above doing this. And we were joking the other day on one of our mentorship calls. This person's just a very new person. That the outlook and what they're doing right now is so beneficial that it's like, you know what, I'm not going to do something that's going to mess up my routine and it's going to mess up my reward systems. So going back to this, when we look at the reward, usually when things are uncontrollable, I think if anything this past year has taught us is that there's a lot that we can't control. right? So when the world is chaotic around us, it makes total sense that you seek control. In a lot of ways, what people do in this case is they seek control through certain behaviors that don't serve them. It could be workaholism, it could be alcoholism, it could be substance abuse, it could be um, conflict, right? It could be having conflict in your marriage. It could be having conflict at work, conflict with friends, conflict with yourself, where if you engage in this behavior that's not serving you, it serves some type of reward system. So it could serve, like I said, some type of control. It could serve some type of safety. It could serve like feeling good, or maybe even just having emotions just in general. All right. So when we look at this, the beauty of this, and this is what what the researchers found just with this, and this is what a lot of the book talks about too, and I think it's so beneficial for us to understand. So we need to be aware of the behaviors. We need to take some real ownership and ask ourselves, does this behavior serve us for the type of outcome that we desire? All right. So if I just mentioned those behaviors earlier, workaholism, alcoholism, any of that, things that cause conflict, right? There's going to be some type of reward system. But the beauty of this is because your triggers and your reward systems in most cases don't change. The beauty of this is that we can actually change the behavior. So if you're someone who is constantly really worried about what's going to happen in life, and you're just engaging in a bunch of disconnection, a lot of workaholism, and it's disconnecting you from the things that you value the most, what you could be searching for in there is a little bit of safety. So the caveat to this is to start testing out, okay, so working too much is not serving me, it's not serving my health, it's definitely not serving my mental health, it's not serving my family. For those that are married or in a relationship, or even just in friendships and relationships that you enjoy, it's definitely not helping that, because I am not present. And even when I'm there, I'm probably still working on my phone, on my computer, whatever that is. The beauty of that is we can start to look at your reward system. So if safety is the biggest reward behind, with this example, workaholism, then we're looking at, okay, what else helps me to feel safe? In most ways, that's where the self-care comes in. That's where your habits play a huge role. And that's where unlearning past habits really takes the stand here. So for you all, if you kind of think about it right now, I kind of want you to do this exercise with me. Just in this example of workaholism and financial safety, what most people are doing when they're doing that is to look at, like, okay, what else helps me to feel safe? Okay. What else helps me to feel like I'm in control? What else helps me to feel feelings, right? How do I feel good about where I'm at right now? And in so many ways, it goes back to your habits, right? Because if you change your habits, you change your life. And because we are a representation of our habits right now, we need to take some real ownership behind, does this habit, or does my life in this way actually serve me? Okay. And so here's our big kicker. Here's what we want to get behind. Okay. So we want to identify the behavior. Does it serve me? Does it not? And again, with this habit loop, for those of you who have been really working on your habits, and shout out to all my one-to-one coaching and group coaching clients right now, all of you are currently doing that. But for our listeners out there who are brand new to this, if you have habits that are really serving you, start to take a look at this. Identify the behavior, experiment with your reward systems. All right, cool. Well, if one reward helps me to feel safe, what else does it help me to feel? It might help me to feel in control. It might help me to feel more confident, right? So we want to start to experiment with the rewards. And then we want to also understand and isolate the triggers. So this goes back to, like, taking some ownership behind, does this habit actually serve you? So with the example of the lunchroom, yeah, that makes total sense. It's a bodily cue telling you to go and get something to eat, and the reward system is some satisfaction. But for those who are, let's say, struggling with tobacco use, right? So there's a trigger that's happening there. It could be because when you go on walks or when you're outside, that's usually when you spark up a cigarette, right? So for those that are are chewing, right, doing something that you do when you're chewing, like being in that location or being in that area, is going to cause you to think about that. And it's the same way when we're trying to unlearn habits. So we want to understand our triggers and our cues, so much so that when it happens, we can start making a very cognitive type of decision where we can understand what we need in the moment, so that we can seek that reward system, so that it's actually serving us. All right. So here's your homework. As always, as your podcast host and high performance mentor, I'm trying to make sure that you are staying up on taking in these action items, because another thing that I heard too, and I think it's so beneficial, the information is readily available. Any of us can go on Google, any of us can pick up a book, any of us can attend a online course, whatever that is, right? But the magic is in the application. You can learn, but if you don't apply it, then it kind of just sits there as dead space, right? So in so many ways right now, as you are building in your habits, the magic comes when you're actually able to apply it. So this is part of your application plan. All right. So what I want you to do as you watch or listen, I want you to screenshot this episode. I want you to tag me at Desi Abeda or at I Made It Pod on IG. And I want you to comment on one trigger that you're aware of. Remember, person, place, or thing, the behavior that is serving you or not, and then what your reward system. Because the first step to any of this is always awareness. And then from there, you gain mentorship, you gain guidance to make sure that you apply this thing. All right. So happy Monday, happy Mentorship Monday. Your podcast host Des here, high performance mentor. I love y'all. Thank you so much as always for listening. Peace.